Hello, I'm Connell Suter, Head of Content at ECI Games, and your host for today. And I wanted to say thank you for joining us for our interview with Dave Jewitt. Now, Dave is someone that doesn't need much introduction, but in case you'd like to know a little bit more, Dave has been a games journalist for a decade, working primarily at Gamespot, and of course helping to create some of the most interesting, fun, and iconic video game content on YouTube of the last 10 years. You might know his work from Loadout and Expert Reacts, two series where he dived into the world of video game firearms and helped educate gamers around the world about the litany of intricacies most of us miss. He was joined in those endeavours by the expert from Royal Armouries, Jonathan Ferguson, but of course, I'll leave his full title up to Dave in the interview. Dave was kind enough to join us for the interview today, where we chat about his time in games, his perspectives on the industry and games journalism, and of course, the amazing series that he's helped bring to us all. There's even a little bit of Warhammer 40k chat at the very end. It's worth sticking around for if you're into that kind of thing. The first half of the interview focuses primarily on Dave's illustrious time in games and his perspectives on the industry, journalism, and how they've changed. And the second half of the interview focuses more on the iconic series that he's created. You can find timestamps to all the different sections in the description below. But in any case, I'll get out of your way, and here's our interview with Dave Jewitt. Awesome. So we are joined today by Dave Jewitt, experienced games professional, journalist, video producer, and a bit of everything. So yeah, Dave, how's it going?
Good, mate. Thanks for inviting me on.
No, absolutely, mate. Thank you so much for joining us. And I think most people listening to this are going to be fairly familiar with some of the stuff you've done. You've done some amazing series, but I guess for anybody unacquainted, could you give us just like a little bit of background on your time in the industry and the kind of jobs you've done?
Yeah, I mean, I joined the game industry. I joined the games industry proper like 9.5 years ago. I started out as literally like a small YouTuber making videos from my bedroom. Like I'd work a IT support job up until like 4 o'clock, go home, have dinner, make videos. Did that, like I had it in my head that I was supposed to be doing like daily uploads. I'm like, you were just a small individual. Like I don't know why I thought that, but I did that for a while. Ended up going to EGX one year. The night before, I thought I should get some business cards. Paid to have business cards rushed to the printers to pick them up in London. I was living in Wales at the time. Picked them up, went to EGX, gave my first ever business card to Lucy James, and that evolved into a job at Gamespot, and I was there for 9.5 years doing a bit of everything. Started out as a junior video producer, making anything from news videos to... We were literally mandated to make memes at one point when everyone was like trying to grow their Facebook video presence and stuff like that. And then, just advanced and tried to do more cool stuff over the years. And I was lucky enough to be there for just shy of a decade.
That's amazing. I mean, what an amazing thing to get those business cards and then have the first one work. I mean, I think the salespeople across the world crying now at the thousands they've given away.
I got 200 printed. First one ended up with a job. I did give out others, but then I was just like, well, I can't use those anymore. I've literally got like company business cards.
That's amazing, though. That's and very cool to like have it just be YouTube event journalism.
Yeah, my progression into the games industry was not the norm. Sites the size of GameSpot were potentially still are sites that people aspire to get to. Like they want to end up at Kotaku, at IGN, at GameSpot. So they'll start smaller sites and sort of move up. And I did do some like written journalism stuff for a website called GGS Gamer for a while. It was like an enthusiast. I'm out of practice of even speaking lately. It's like a more fan enthusiast site.
Sure.
But yeah, it wasn't the norm to sort of be doing your own thing and then jump up to one of the biggest sites in the world. So I was, super lucky. Right place, right time, and I had like a bank of content that I could be like, hey, I at least know my way around. Well, it was Sony Vegas at the time, and then they were like, oh yeah, come join GameSpot, and you have to use a Mac and learn Adobe Premiere. It's like, hey, if you get me out of Wales, I'll do that.
Oh, that's quality. That's it's interesting as well that you were like doing written reviews back then. It kind of like takes us on to, I guess, the next question about that time, and I guess like thinking about the difference, because I was absolutely loved games journalism. I always wanted to be a games journalist, and certainly in 2013, 2014, it still was absolutely the dream. And then I started in QA, but looking now and thinking about what it's like for like people who are the age now that we sort of were then, and like looking at the industry, it's pretty crazy how different it is. So I'd love to hear, like, how did it change over that time? Did you like feel the world of games journalism changing? I guess you've mentioned there about being mandated for memes. I guess that's quite a noticeable change, that it's probably a bit different now. But how did it feel in like 2024 compared with 2014 when you just sort of freshly come out that EGX?
2024 was, I mean, I may be speaking for myself, but talking to other colleagues and peers in the industry, everyone has been a bit on edge over the past couple of years at least. COVID's changed the environment of the games journalism a lot. It made it trickier to go to events, network, even collaborate with other people. That's one of the reasons why the event space changed so much. More and more, I was able to attend preview events from home using programs like Parsec, like remoting into a computer to play a preview build of something. And it was never ideal, but I think it sort of knocked the perception of the industry out a little bit. Being like, we don't need, we can do cool events and give access without, hiring an event space and getting everyone over. But obviously, a lot of the stories of the past couple of years have been people, unfortunately, like myself, getting laid off from the studio side, publisher side, to the press side. In every aspect of the industry, people are struggling to stay hold of employment. And from every part of the games industry, when I've spoken to developers from every part of development, script writers, programmers, QA, artists, everyone is a bit just on edge at the minute, and that's understandable. When I joined Gamespot, I was literally asked about Gamergate in my interview at Gamespot.
Wow.
So it was fresh off the back of all of that, and understandably, they wanted to sort of know what people's thoughts around that were, because it was a super sensitive time, and I have colleagues that were directly affected by that. So it was a bit of a litmus test to be like, are you a wrong'un coming in with certain headspace or certain beliefs? And like that was I knew it was all happening, obviously, but not as intimately as obviously people in the games industry were feeling it all. So joining just on the tail end of that, and hearing stories about the 10 years prior to me, and then seeing the 10 years that I then went through myself, the shift has been, it's been crazy. Some for better, some for worse. The type of content people make, especially on the big professional side, has changed a lot. Everything from the written space to the YouTube space to the ad space to Google Analytics, all of it's changed. All of it became so much more important, and that's one of the reasons why things have become a bit on the knife edge, I think. We're all competing for similar spaces now. We're all competing for SEO and Google traffic, and then you could have Google or YouTube change the algorithm, and it massively affects your work and how many eyes get seen on it. So that's obviously something that's changed, not just in my decade of being part of the industry, but even prior to that, is something that I think people, even now, still getting used to. It's so hard to shift the perception of what games journalism is, what it was, the weird space it sits in now. And I think there has been, what we've ended up with is there's a lot of people, both individuals and sites, that sit in between the influencer and press and YouTuber space, But at the same time, one thing I have noticed quite significantly is over the last 10 years, the shift in perception from sort of fans and the public, but also the shift in how publishers and developers work with you as well. It felt very siloed between press and influencer, which I think may be having an effect on how people are tweaking their businesses and their content plans going forward.
That's really interesting. It's that shift of what you're saying there, that siloing between the two, and all these factors going together are fascinating to think about. And like, I'm really glad you mentioned Gamergate, because I kind of forget how crazy that couple of years were, and how it did that shift between, and it's not necessarily to blame for it, maybe that's unfair to say, but it's like the influencer shift and this like weird conversation about trust. Is that what affected it? Is that what, or did that feel like it almost kick-started this kind of like move towards them like prioritizing influencers and this like direct to the user view?
Well, there's definitely been a very clear perception over the past few years where people lean into an individual more than they do a brand. You know, you'd see the Gamespot Twitter account tweet something and they'd get quiet brand. Like people don't connect with it. They want like an individual to connect with. They want a face to connect with. And that was a thing that, you know, GameSpot and other sites were doing a lot over the last 10 years. They wanted to elevate individuals to be, you know, their hosts for people to sort of connect with the individual, connect with the face, connect with the personality, and make that a reason to come back to the channel. And that was something that, yeah, we really had to figure out while I was there. You know, when I came on board, it was off the back of my own channel, so I did like the idea of me being an internet personality, and you know, everyone at some point over the past 10 years have been like, yeah, I want to be an influencer and do all this cool stuff. But then you've also got the weight of representing a brand still. So it is challenging to have your personality on show while also representing that brand, and that brand being like, oh, we want your personality to be on show, please, because, you know, there's market data saying that that's why people will come back. That's why people will, you know, subscribe and want to be part of this, you know, little community. And like, my role was very video focused, but a lot of that was, you know, how do we get that personality out there? How do we reach these kids, sort of thing?
It's just really interesting to hear about that personality-led stuff. And again, like, not to just be like, oh, I used to watch Giant Bomb, but I always remember Giant Bomb talking about that, about how they felt that the reason their website had worked when they had spun off from GameSpot in the late 2000s was because they were personality-driven, and that they had managed to cultivate a vibe around them that people would follow. So I guess the proof's in the pudding, right? People will follow the personalities more than they'll do it. But I imagine that does change the conversation for journalists as well. Like, you know, like, I've journalists in my family, it's not about, it was never, I mean, they were like newspaper journalists, so the most featuring they had was their name in small lettering under the title. But it must change it quite a lot when suddenly not just that you're representing a brand as a face, but also that part of your own personality is now this product to talk about games. It's interesting.
Yeah, and it's always been tricky. It really depends on the person as well, because more and more a focus on personality and viewers connecting to a personality became something that was desirable and something that was beneficial to the content. But you can't just say to someone that wrote, you know, a review, go in front of the camera, be really personable. Some people just don't like it. Some people, that's not even what the work they wanted to do. I know individuals that like, hey, I wanted to make video production behind the scenes. I really like shooting. I like making things look really beautiful. And it's like, hey, get in front of a camera and, you know, make sure people like you. I want to listen to you and engage with you. That's like really tricky. There's so many instances where you can come across squeezing a circle into a square-shaped hole just because you might not have necessarily hired that person as a host or a personality, but because that's what's required now, you've got to fill that role all of a sudden. And that's something that, at least for myself, I was very much a jack of all trades at Gamespot. But yeah, more and more as the influencer space, YouTube space, tapped into individuals. There's so many times that, you know, I've either been in meetings myself, or I've heard through the grapevine from other people from other sites, and even in development, someone will mention, oh, this influencer, this individual has done this, this, and this. We should do something like that. And it's like, if only it was that easy, right?
Totally.
But it's not. It's just not that black and white, unfortunately. But I do think that's where the industry is now. The biggest voices in games right now aren't necessarily websites, aren't necessarily journalists writing great reviews and previews. It's influencers, it's Twitch streamers, it's YouTubers. And to a lot of people watching this will be like, yeah, obviously that's been the case for years. But part of the industry is still sort of wrestling with that, I think. But I think that's where we are, and more and more has it become important for press, I guess, or video producers or people in games to be multi-skilled. And you're like, it's strange, it's almost cyclical, and I very well may be off base here, but like when I joined 10 years ago, people were like, oh yeah, the pivot to video. People were telling me stories about when YouTube was getting bigger and putting videos on their sites. That pivot to video thing. It's almost like there's like a mini version of that at the minute, when it's like, we've got video, but now we're pivoting it again to a whole different thing that's just trendy right now.
Totally. I think that's really interesting as well, that you mentioned videos specifically and that pivot, because totally it's and you're saying about people hearing this importance of streamers and YouTubers and going, of course it is, but it's exactly the same vibe with video, where it's like, it wasn't that long ago that this was not the standard at all, and for anyone who saw that, it still feels weird. And even in terms of reviews, the lack of written reviews now, there's lots of us who are still like, you know, I like reading written reviews. There's not enough of these. But I imagine people that never read them would be like, why would you not want to see video of the game behind it? Why wouldn't you want to just have someone talk about it?
And it's not just press anymore either. It's like, it's on the development side. More so than not, a press release is accompanied by a video of the press release, of the update. You know, TikTok and YouTube Shorts are now part of the strategy to get an update out there, to get word about your game out there. And even those it's important for them to tap into personalities, like dev streams. That's where that comes from, right? People want people to connect with the developers, to sort of feel comfortable with them, to break down that perception of it's not a brand talking to you, it's an individual. It's sort of like tricking the audience into thinking that, yeah, no, it's just a sort of one-to-one, and it's not a piece of corporate media, which, you know, it is at the end of the day. But I think it's still possible to have that personality and to connect with people at the same time. But to circle back when we talked about trust, I do think that this is maybe a small ripple of that trust that became shaken so many years ago. Like, people still tell certain stories about, you know, press sites and why they don't trust them and why they prefer to, you know, go to individuals. Like, that's not something that I think the games industry has escaped from or ever will escape from, and it's now adapting to, you know, different consumer tastes because of that in some weird ways.
That's really interesting. No, it's really funny as well that, yeah, it's not a new thing as well, right? You used to hear loads of stories of sites being subtly like, they'd get the cold shoulder from certain devs, even major companies. I remember Nintendo having quite a lot of like companies that had reviewed some stuff badly or they didn't like, and situation had just deteriorated. And I imagine that's not quite the same with influencers, and that trust becomes different because also the dynamic's so different that it's a different kind of trust. So it's like trusting in a fan of your games to like your games, and sure, but whereas trusting an examiner to sort of fairly examine you is quite a different conversation.
Yeah, and a lot of people will follow certain influencers that are already fans of the same thing that they are.
Totally,
I do think there is a degree of people enjoying watching people that will just agree with them ahead of time, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Like, I watch this streamer because they love these games. I love these games. So when he starts talking about XYZ game, it justifies my purchase for me. I don't want my perception of what a game might be, or what I think a game is, challenged by an individual, especially if it's an individual that is, again, like, connected to a brand. People, it's a weird dehumanizing thing when you've got that big logo behind you in again, very weird ways.
It's very interesting because it makes me think a lot about people who talk about the difficulties with, especially in games, where Metacritic, when it was kind of big in games and people were trying to, like, I mean, I know it's still kind of big now, but it felt like people kind of realized that it's just not the way to be really analyzing the quality of them. And with that, often the problem being that it's like you need to find someone that you kind of vibe with, and that, like, there needs to be some way that you see eye to eye on it. But I think it's really interesting what you're saying about that. Actually, it's kind of gone so far even that way, where it's not about finding someone that you can usually vibe with and then almost go like, oh, it's interesting they didn't like this, and figure it out. It's more you're looking for someone who has fairly exact opinions to what you have, and it makes you wonder if that's almost what leads partially, and not to blame a single issue for this, but the kind of ongoing over the top vitriol that we see in games, where when something bad happens, everyone's piling on. I guess pylons may be the better word for it. Just like being a little too much, and things being like, that's a valid complaint, but you need to calm down. There's way too many people shouting about this, and I guess that's
definitely a new element where there's like a snowball of opinion that can really affect games. Like review bombing. Review bombing wasn't really a thing like years ago, but that can really shift a perception of a game, and it can shift like development timelines and development goals. Like Helldivers 2 was really influenced by review bombing, both through the sort of the issues with PlayStation Plus, but also just when things were unbalanced, people were like, oh, I'm gonna I suppose in some ways it's difficult to call it review bombing, because at the same time you are making your voice heard. There are some things where it's justified to, you know, make a stand and get out there and share your piece. And I think that PSN thing was one of those moments. Like, I'm not surprised that was like a huge backlash. But I think the trend towards that has caused things like this to pop up when there's smaller issues in games, where it's something that's like, you know, just a bit buggy, and, you know, people can go too far. And I do agree, if a product isn't up to your standard, you know, vote with your wallet, make your voice heard. You should be honest and get your voice out there and share that opinion. But as is the sort of through line of games industry, there's always the bad actors that do take it too far. It's no different, you know. I've got so many stories about people getting sent death threats because they either did a bad review, and not bad quality wise, a review that was bad, that was critical of a game. Similarly, like, I know developers that have had like really hard times because they've made artistic choices in a game, and some person online will be that bad actor. But in many ways, like, it's tricky, right? Because the fact that player voice now is important, and there are more ears paying attention to player voice, is great. But it's like, not to sound cheesy, but with like great power and all that, like, it can very much go off in one direction too far, and then it's like, well, who do you listen to?
Totally, absolutely, yeah. Not to be too specific, but yeah, I've seen that firsthand, of literally being QA in a game, having maybe 3 people on the forum saying we've seen this problem, no one else being able to confirm it, no dev, no QA, but the fear of that issue being like, we'll disable an entire feature, because if that is a problem, it's going to be a major problem. And you're like, that's great to listen to the players, but you're still like, but should we not assume that maybe they might have made a mistake, that they've misconstrued something? That's really interesting.
But that real critical response to a lot of things, I think that's the sort of, I guess, whole thing that I was getting at. Critical response and the intensity of that response to both studios and individuals. It doesn't make it super comfortable to be honest, I feel.
Totally. And
honesty is what journalists and individual influencers and developers that's something we should all be striving for. But if that honesty is too critical, you know, there is an element of vitriol that comes with that, which, again, maybe I'm naive, but I didn't feel was quite so severe a few years ago.
Totally. Yeah. I jump back to the one that I always think of as an early example of that is a funny one, because it was a GameSpot review, and they gave Shenmue 6.9, and people were furious. I remember, and like they remember at one of the events they found the guy that did the review and gave a t-shirt with the 6.9 in it, and he then was like, I am not wearing that on the chance that someone actually realizes that's me. But even then, that felt like such a incredibly specific game, as Shenmue was, an incredibly specific case, and a game that has such a following and all this, and totally, but it's gone from being these very individual cases to like a game comes out and you're almost like holding your breath a little bit of like, oh, I hope this isn't anything crazy, and like, and also like, I hope if it's broken in the way that's okay, and like we can fix it.
It's so bizarre now, because, you know, we used to joke about the console war and stuff, and that doesn't really feel like much of a thing. There's not like
totally
Xbox and PlayStation people like battling against each other anymore. And yet I feel like parts of gaming has become more factionalized in some weird way. Like Balatro being nominated for Game of the Year, and the amount of people that I'd see on Twitter, on TikTok, on Reddit being like, how is this card game Game of the Year? Like, and getting really like upset about it. You've not played it. And just because it's not for you doesn't mean that like it's not worth talking about.
Totally.
But there's no reason to get so upset. And there was elements of that with Black Myth Wukong as well. People getting really upset that a game that they really loved is not getting the recognition that they think it deserves. And it's okay to love it, and it's okay for other people not to. Like, some of my favourite games people would call a 6 out of 10. I don't mind.
Absolutely.
It's fine, because I love those games, and it's okay to love bad games. It's okay to dislike good games. But yeah, the energy, both good and bad, admittedly, behind all of that discussion now has definitely shifted. And I look at it and I'm like, geez, like, relax a little bit. Like, it's just a card game. It's just a poker game. Like, you know, it's just a roguelike. It can't hurt you. It's okay.
And there's
You
only one
can
guy,
still enjoy
so
the
like...
games that you enjoy. It's fine.
Absolutely, man. No, totally. I felt that same way, and like it was funny because also the shift as well of like half of it being like people being ecstatic that this one-person game, a true one-person game, has been nominated, and then totally everyone else, and also even just the indie perception of it, even past like it being a card game, people just being like, look at it, and it's just like, is this where we're at? That it's just like, look at the quality of it. Like, should Tetris never have been regarded as good? You know? No, it's so interesting, and one of the things I struggle with there, and you mentioned, I think is a really great point, is the energy that people have, not just to keep going, but within it. Like, the heat is just insane. And why is it that games has this? Like, why is it that games has such a hot audience who is ready to jump off at anything? And sure, film is a more widespread medium, television's a more widespread medium, and you get people in those as well who still have that same heat about certain things. But it does feel like in games, it's an endless amount of energy to be annoyed about something or ecstatic about it. We almost have the highest highs and the lowest lows of any of the media industries. You know?
I wonder if it's an element of like energy you put in is the energy you put out. Like if you watch a film, say you and I went to go see a movie, it's 2 hours long. If you say I loved it and I was like, I really thought that stunk, you'd be like, really? But you've only invested 2 hours. It's not your personality. But if you've been playing a franchise for years and have invested 40, 50, 60 quid a copy, and you play it all the time, your friends play it all the time, that's the sort of content you consume, and someone says, no, I think that's rubbish actually, I don't like that franchise, because you've invested so much for yourself, so many hours into it, it almost feels like a little bit of an insult to you as a person, or at least I feel like that might be how people are taking it. Like if you're talking about a game that's coming up and you're like really excited about it, you're talking about it all the time, you're messaging your friends in Discord, you've wish listed it on Steam, then it comes out and it's a bit of a stinker, it can make you feel a bit foolish.
Totally.
And I think that's more intense in games than it is in movies, because again, the investment isn't as much. And we're in a very odd place with games now, in many ways, you know, with the layoffs, with a lot of the industry feeling on edge because of layoffs, because of the economy, because of the energy that might come back at you when you release a game, or if the game changes, because of the audience. I think that is making it tougher to be part of the games industry. But games itself, or games themselves, the sort of overall gaming space, as a consumer at least, I think is in a really good position, because we've had games like Balatro become part of the Game of the Year conversation, because we've had such varied games. The indie space is stronger than it's been in quite some time. We've more and more we're able to connect with people. You know, crossplay is a thing now. You can play with a wider network of friends. We're able to lose ourselves in so many more worlds. The amount of games that, you know, if you started gaming today, the amount you'd be able to jump into is massive. But then at the same time, the investment to be part of that community is also higher. So there are real peaks and troughs to the state of the games industry right now. And we've had years where it's sort of been in the middle. No real highs, no real lows, no amazing releases, but no huge dramas or upsets either. Whereas now I feel like it has been real up and down. But because of those ups, you can see the potential. And I think that's one of the things that I've taken from studios as well. Like I've made documentaries with various different game studios. I've spoken to developers, and one thing that's not changed is the passion there. It's passion within definite uncertainty, and that's what I felt at Gamespot. Like I was really proud of the content I was making, but after going through so many rounds of layoffs, the company as a whole, you can bet your bottom dollar that whenever a meeting invite was dropped into my calendar unexpectedly, I did gulp. And it definitely added a flaw of stress. And I think that's what everyone is feeling, but everyone is doing their damnedest to be as passionate and professional and make the best thing possible. Like I made a documentary about Star Wars Outlaws, and that's a game that didn't perform super well, both critically and public reception. I know some people really liked it. I personally thought it was a good time. I liked it. You know, I like a Star Wars game. It wasn't the best game in the world, didn't blow my socks off, but it was okay. Didn't deserve a lot of the, again, vocal minority of anger and frustration that it got. But the thing that struck me when I was at that studio is how passionate people were and remained. Like seeing people work, and this wasn't even the people that I was interviewing. This is when the press event was over. We got to stay at the studio for an extra day, and I was just observing people. But you could see people having a good time, working hard, being proud of the stuff they were doing, the conversations that was part of the conversations I overheard. But that was close enough to release where there was already people saying like, oh, it's going to suck, it's going to fail. You know, despite that energy, despite so many, you know, members of the public, so many consumers talking about how this game is going to flop, they were still putting everything into it. And there is so much talent, so much tech, so much potential again in the games industry. I think I just want to see that come to fruition.
Totally.
But the state of the industry has not made it easy for that to come to fruition. You know, the number of big games has potentially lessened, and some studios will go for a safer bet, or what they conceive as a safer bet, or what they think is going to be a safer bet. Like, yeah, we should make a battle royale because, you know, an item shop makes loads of money. We should make a hero shooter because the item shop makes loads of money. There's a trend here. And people do their damnedest to make that game. They might not think it's going to be the best game, but that's what they've been told to make, and they will work damn hard to make it. Like Concord is another example that did not do well at all. I mean, it sounds brutal, but it's not untrue. That's probably one of the biggest failures we've seen in a long time. But I can stand here and objectively say it was well made. It might not have been fun, but like, you can't tell me that, like, even just graphically, totally, it's not, you know, polished. aesthetically might not have been for everyone. I don't think it was, the style was great, but it was different, and that came from passion. And I think it was just, I don't know, but it sounds maybe overly harsh, but I don't know if there are people at the top that know how to point that passion in the right directions. Like they're pointing all this passion in the direction of return on investment instead of making the best game possible. And that's not every studio, but I do think we've had a lot of that, especially over the last 10 years. And bubbles burst, right?
Totally. I think that's so interesting what you said there, is everything about the stress level rising and how that as like a base level of like uncertainty affects not just, I think people often think about it in businessy times, it becomes about risk of making this game, but actually how that affects a whole team of people and how the passion they're putting into it. Absolutely. And that's such an intriguing comparison, what you were saying earlier on about this personality-driven journalism that everyone's focusing on and trying to make it, because it's easy to get that person's passion on the screen if you have them on screen. But with a big AAA team, that so many people have that perception that there isn't a passion in AAA. And I think, as you say, it unfortunately probably comes from a perception from the way the game reflects onto the player because of the direction someone set somewhere way up that chain that doesn't reflect the passions of the team making it. And it's such a sad thing to think about. It totally is. It's like using people's passion in games, and it is an industry full of passionate people, probably one of the most passionate industries, because you could go make more money other places and work on something a lot less fun. I know a lot of QA people who went and do, now work on medical software, and they might make more money, but they hate their jobs. So it becomes one of these things. But that's so interesting to think about how that then looks in AAA, and how AAA would be able to re-harness that passion into something that the teams themselves are able to put on screen.
I do think, I'm not privy to actual, development cycles, but I think some studios listen to their team and their community better than others. I always start thinking about Skull and Bones. Like I played that at a Gamescom like 7 years ago, I want to say, and it was a very different game. That was just the ship-to-ship combat, and I was really excited about that game. Really, really excited. I think I did a preview way back when I came. I was like, this is great. It's like the Black Flag ship combat. It's got all this really great stuff, and it gets, that's a game that got stuck mostly because of bureaucracy and management, rather than, oh, we need to make this feature, we need to do this feature, and the direction of it, lengthen the time. And I think, again, it's a beautiful game. It has so many of the fundamentals of what would make like a cool pirate ship game. It's got great style, but it's not the kind of game with that aesthetic and setting that people wanted. So someone's making that decision. Someone's saying like, hey, this is going to be a seasonal battle pass sort of thing. This is going to be something that we want people to put like tons and tons of hours into, and complete all those tiers and all that stuff. But if you used all the resources and all the tech and all the talent that made Skull and Bones and made like a really tight, exciting pirate adventure that was, maybe akin to what Black Flag was, that could have been a very, very different story. And that's another thing that has shifted in the games industry. We got to a point where people wanted more and more value. It was almost totally boastful from studios being like, this is a 60-hour epic, this is a 100-hour this. Now I'm like, cool, I'm not playing it.
Totally.
I'm at least not playing 100 hours of it. Like I'll the idea of like a tighter 18, 12 story campaign is so much more appealing now. And especially if it's a game where, you've got 80 hours of content, but it's actually 20 hours of content that's been diluted. People are more in tune with that as well, I think. And I think it's one of those things where it's like, oh, we need to make return on investment because we've invested so much. Games are bloody expensive. So they need to make that money back. How do you make money back? Item shops. Hook them in for 60 hours. Give them cosmetics to buy once they've already invested in that time. Because there's definitely data out there where you're like, oh, if someone's invested 40 hours to get through all these side quests and all this story and unlock all this part of the map and do all this cool stuff and level up, it makes it easier for that individual to be like, yeah, £6 for a skin is okay actually. If it's a 10-hour story and it's £6 a skin, you're not paying that. Like,
totally.
So it's and I think we are, you know, bouncing back to shorter, tighter games, I feel. But yeah, the direction of games as a whole, I think, is a little skewed. Is potentially not what is resonating with consumers. Like you take Helldivers, for example. That knew what it wanted to be, and that it put everything into being that. And that was massively successful. Had its issues and it had its dramas, but in terms of how much people loved it, how much people resonated with it, how many players actually played it for so long and then hopped back when there was updates and all that stuff, you know, it's incredible when I'm looking through Reddit or Twitter or something, or even on YouTube, and there are people saying, hey, release more cosmetics because I want to give you money because you've made a good thing, not, oh my god, you've got your cosmetics going, like, I'm not, and being upset by that. Totally. But you know, Helldivers was a special beast. But it's again one of those things, the contrasting reception of all these games after so many years now. But yeah, no doubt. I think it was the Helldivers dev. I always remember their website, because their website, the first thing it said in it was, a game for everyone is a game for no one. And I always remember that as being quite a bold statement to make in the industry at the time, and being like, people could read that in wrong ways as well, and people could but the fact that they were just like, no, that's our mission statement, that's the way we view it. Yeah. You're totally right. And it's funny, you're absolutely right about the value proposition. Is such an interesting thing when, again, you look at reviews from the mid-2000s, and when journalists then were asked, what is the point of games reviews? They're like, well, ultimately, it's a value proposition. It's about, is this game worth your money? And that could come through in a variety of different ways. But it's almost like if every film started being Lord of the Rings length. Like, everyone saw Lord of the Rings success and went, okay, we all need to make 3.5 hour long epics. See, I love Red Dead 2. Like, but I can appreciate that it was also a time sink. Yeah, again, it's like I think people are happy to put 80 hours into something if our 1 to 10 is the same quality as our 70 to 80. But when there's those lulls, or when there are mechanics that sort of slow you down, like if you want to beeline the Red Dead story, it's not going to take you that long. But if that story mission is level 20, and to get to level 20 I have to do these side quests that aren't very fun, it doesn't feel as good. And Witcher is another example of, like, yeah, it's a long game, but it's great the way through, and it's consistent, and it doesn't feel like it's really taking your time for granted at any point. Totally. And that is, I think, another thing that, you know, we've seen in a few games. It feels like my time investment isn't worth getting to this next bit, especially if I don't know how bloody good it's going to be.
Totally. Very interesting you mentioned Witcher, talking about the heat of the games industry and the strange reactions people have. That Witcher 4 trailer, and everyone just being like, really? Like, people are upset about this?
That element of the industry of late is exhausting. Like, I don't know anyone on the press side, on the development side, that isn't just tired of that. Yeah. Like, I feel like I can say this. I'm not representing I'm not representing a company anymore. I can, with my full chest, tell these people to go and touch grass. Like, honestly, you know, it's. Why do you care? I honestly don't know. And the thing is like, I'm not saying that there's not a place for, like, beautiful people in games. Sure, if you want to play those type of games, whatever. Like it doesn't matter to me. You play whatever kind of games you want. You know, if you want to play Infinity Nikki and make some of the, like, most high fidelity, incredibly modeled dresses and dress up your character, go for it. If you want to play Space Marine 2 and kick about as one of the ugliest individuals that is possible to be, all scarred and messed up, great. But don't be coming out here and be like, oh yeah, this beloved game character's got the wrong cheekbone structure. It's embarrassing. And when there are so many such variety in games that you can play now. Like, people should just
Totally.
be free to play what they want, and people should be free to make the games that they want without feeling like they're going to create a Twitter storm. Or, I know people that, because of a game coming out, so the Witcher reveal in this regard, and because of the energy that people had around the whole Siri conversation, they, as women, were getting more flack online because it's empowering all these people
totally.
to talk about this sort of stuff, to get angry about this sort of thing. And then because they feel they can comment on the appearance of a fictional a fictional woman made out of pixels, they then feel like they have the right to comment on a real person. And it's like, quit.
Totally.
Would you accept someone talking about this new Siri as if they were your mother, your sister, your daughter? No, just because it's not a real person. Like, it's tricky because it isn't a real person, but it's also not worth the effort.
It reflects back into you, innit? Totally. It's a crazy time. Speaking of crazy times, 2 weeks ago I saw someone saying they were waiting for Elder Scrolls 6 E3 news, and I was amazed because it's been quite a few years. And you went to quite a few E3s back in the day, right? A couple?
Three, maybe 2 or 3. Yeah.
It's amazing. Like, to think, to get to the tail end of it even, right? It's like, it's kind of there's such a mystique around that now. And you went to quite a few Gamescoms as well.
Yeah.
As you were mentioning even earlier on. So I know that we're kind of past this, like, is Gamescom the next E3? Is TGS the next E3? Is anything like that? But what did you think when those discussions were going on? And then I guess, like, do you think we need an E3?
I don't think we need one. I think they're nice to haves. They definitely have their benefits. When E3 and Gamescom existed in parallel, it was almost like it was announced at E3 and then you play it at Gamescom. That was the usual pattern, because they'd get the big, naming lights, they'd get all the excitement of the release trailers, and then a few weeks later sometimes, people would be able to play something, or people would be able to see like a behind closed doors, or get a little more access. So it made sense, the trajectory of that marketing, like big flashy E3, then a bit more, then a bit more, then a bit more, all the way up to release, or even the next E3. I do miss it, and it was like an incredible experience. I was actually at the first E3 where it was being made open to the public.
Oh, sure.
And it made it busier, it made it hard to get around. But what was really cool to see is all the people that, they saw this mystique around E3, and now they got to be a part of it. Like the first one I went to, when it was just still press, I was like, oh my god, I've grown up watching this show, and now I'm here. Now I'm like on a live stream, like talking about a game that I just played. Like, it's crazy, and I can see why people wanted to go, and even why the public just wanted to be a part of it. I don't think it's as necessary now in terms of just game marketing. We've got smaller events throughout the year, and so many publishers or platforms will now just have their own event and make it like a virtual thing. The amount of people that would tune in to a Nintendo Direct, and it could be 20 minutes of tiny little indie games and no Silksong announcement, but people will still tune in by the droves. I think there's definitely benefits to some event, because it again gives people that like early access, or gives press early access, or creators early access to communicate that to an audience, to the consumer. I think it's a harder sell as a consumer if you're like, I've heard about this game from no one but the developers, from no one but the publishers, and now it's out. I don't know what to do. But if you've been like, oh, I've heard that it was pretty good, but it had some issues 6 months ago, like I really like the vibe, we got this exclusive gameplay, it's definitely helpful for the marketing cycle of a game. But it's also helpful for the community and creators and press as well, because every big event like Gamescom, we'd see a big spike in traffic. We'd have the ability to make loads of videos around the event, and it keeps excitement levels high, I feel, because that's another thing. There's release seasons. We always used to get really busy around like October, November, and into December, because loads of games were coming out, and then it'd be really quiet in January, February. So I think just for the games industry as a whole to feel like something's always happening, to keep energy levels high, I think these events are really important. And like personally, they're great for like networking, for again getting hands-on with games. We were able to build like content plans going forward because we got to have access to something, and I think that's still possible in isolation from those events, but it makes it a lot easier if they're all in the same place and you can just be there for a few days. And it having an open element of it means that it's not all sort of hush hush behind closed doors. I always felt that if I got to see a preview at Gamescom and I could say to people like, hey, I saw this preview at Gamescom and like loads of other people were there and it was on the show floor and all this, that and the other, it has a different energy to me saying I went to a studio and I got put in a room and I got to play a game for a few hours. It just has that little different vibe to it. It feels like it's a bit more raw and a bit more accessible to the people watching it. Whereas if I say, oh yeah, no, I went directly to their offices, you wouldn't even be let in. But you could come to Gamescom as a fan. You could experience what it's like, and I got to share that experience with a bunch of people, even if it is just in the business area. But I don't think we'll see an E3 come back. I don't think we'll see something of that size. Like, that's even just the costs involved, and especially with how games are at the minute, and development costs and marketing costs, how much it costs to even get your trailer shown at a big showcase like the Game of the Year Awards. That's actually like a big ask now, and it's not as necessary as it used to be. E3 used to be bigger because all like the press came, all the magazines came, all the sites came, and that would be really the only way to get your word out about your game. But now, again, going back to the YouTube space, influencer space, there are other ways to get words out to your game that might even be more accessible and resonate more with an audience outside of this big industry event where, again, you're sort of relying on the opinion of a brand, a site, to tell you about it.
Totally.
And not everyone resonates with that. Like, even when individual content creators started to go to things like E3, that was like a smaller shift. And like, I wouldn't want to name any names, but I've spoken to press before that always had a bit of a bee in their bonnet about influencers coming to events or getting access. And so, some of it is because, especially in recent years, the press and influencers have been handled differently, and at one point it was all sort of handled together. But yeah, there was a section of old guard, let's call them, that were like had looked down the nose at individual influencers. But now influencers in some cases are the most important thing to tap into to get a word out about your game, rather than the press.
No doubt, totally. Yeah, a bunch of old guard being, I have a journalism degree. Who is this man with a camera? But no doubt, no, totally. I remember, I think that shift, it makes a lot of sense. It's like people were only going to E3 because it was centralized attention, and totally, as brands realized they didn't need to centralize that, and actually they could be the star of their own show. And as you say, if it costs this much anyway, you're already paying for all your booth and everything. You do what Sony or Nintendo do, and you just do it yourself and say, come and watch us.
Yeah, and then they're not competing for airtime or page space at that point. Like, that week can be all about them, and then they know if they get the word out, everyone else will get out of their way because they don't want to compete for that space.
Completely. And it goes back to what you're saying about finding influencers who often directly agree with your opinions. Is even for the brand, it works well for them because they're almost guaranteeing an audience that is invested in them specifically, instead of having someone drifting in from the Konami event next door and writing it up going, bit rubbish or something.
I think there is like a more perceived honesty. And I'm not, I like, by no means do I want to say that influencers or content creators aren't honest about their opinions. But I think because it's an individual versus a brand, the perception of honesty, I think, is different just from the viewer. And I'm not ignorant to the fact that big sites like ones that I used to work for have had stories about them that have perpetuated from years and years ago, even to now. And people will have like a perception about a big site because they're like, oh, because this happened, I don't trust them.
Yeah.
And it's like, I mean, I can say that everyone I've ever worked with has been the most, respectful, honest, most journalistically integral, or no, I was phrasing that the wrong way. Everyone that I've ever worked with has shown such integrity in what they say and what they produce and what they put out. They've always been honest. They've always been proud of the work that they put out. And I've never once thought twice about that. But I'm not the consumer, the average viewer. And I know there are still stories that have perpetuated over time that are still, things that people talk about now. And as an influencer, I don't think there is that much of that. Because as well, I think you're held to a higher standard if you are a journalist in some regards. And again, that is not to besmirch any influencer. Every one of those that I watch frequently, I've never had any cause to question their integrity. Totally. But I think it's because they're a person, and in the influencer space, you do start to think of them as a bit of your mate. They're allowed to be a little more fallible. They're allowed to sort of stumble over their opinions or change, or let their excitement get away with them a little more than I think press are. I think press are held to a bit of a tenser, higher regard in terms of when they're putting out opinions.
Absolutely. I think it goes back to what we were saying about Gamergate earlier on, and the idea and the crazy thing that when you think that originally it started as an argument about transparency in games journalism, and specifically with regarding to someone being excited about a game that they had a private relationship with the person. And you're like, but how many influencers do go on YouTube? And it's not even that it's necessarily anything untoward behind it, but they've probably been sent that code by the dev and they're not going to make that clear, and that there's an agreement in place, or just that they've got a mate who works on that dev team and they wouldn't want to reflect badly on their friend's game. And
I mean, it's even as basic as when I've made videos in the past and I've said the wrong year of something, or if I've used the wrong figure, something very basic, a very human mistake, and I'll see a content creator make that same mistake, but the response to it is very different. Because I was part of Gamespot, I shouldn't be making those mistakes. But I was part of a site, but I am just a human being, and those mistakes happen. But when you're an influencer, and I've even seen it just in my own content creation, if I make a bit of a mistake, I'm just in the comments being like, oh yeah, I got that wrong, blah blah blah, and it's fine. But because I had a big G behind me, all of a sudden I wasn't allowed to make mistakes, and so that means that the perception is a little different. And when we were talking about E3, the content you also make is very different from an influencer to press. Press can sometimes be a bit more serious, whereas influencer might be something more of a casual vlog, and that's what the audience resonates with. I don't think we'll see an E3 again, but I don't think Gamescom is going anywhere, and I think Gamescom is even more important now because there is no E3. But I think Gamescom is still finding its feet a little bit, because there was always that idea that Gamescom would be where you play a lot of stuff, and E3 was where it was all announced. The last Gamescom I went to, I was like, is this playable? No. Is this playable? No. Is this playable? It's a hands-off demo.
Yeah, interesting.
And I'm just like, this is not what Gamescom used to be. It's not. It wasn't what that it was. Last year was a big shift in my Gamescom perception. I was like, I really thought more would be playable here, but there just wasn't that access. So I think Gamespot itself is still finding its own feet as the new biggest game event too.
Totally. That's super interesting. I've not heard anybody say anything about the change of Gamescom. I think that's really intriguing. Everyone's so focused on E3, and then is this the new one? Is this the new one? That people aren't, I guess they don't almost notice it. Also, it's that thing, right, where it's like boiling a frog. When it's a slow change, people often don't notice it. But if it happens overnight, you're like, oh shit, suddenly Gamescom's got nothing left.
Yeah, there were
really
some
intriguing
games that I saw where it was like, you're just here to be here.
Sure,
this game is too early to play. And it's very clear that this is too early to play. But maybe you just wanted the, hey, we're at Gamescom, and the attention that brings.
Completely.
But I don't think... I think there are a lot of people that are thinking that Gamescom is going to be the new E3, the new biggest games event of the year. But I don't think a lot of people at Gamescom have been told that. I don't think a lot of people that are attending Gamescom have been told that. You know, they're still finding their feet after COVID and stuff as well. Yeah. So I would be intrigued to see how next year's goes and what sort of games are there and playable and showcased there. But I mean, Gamescom is like a weird chaotic energy anyway. Like,
no doubt, yeah.
It'd be, you'd go into a hall and the biggest thing there would be the new farming simulator game.
Yeah.
And like, there's nothing against farming simulator games, but like Germany loves simulator games.
Unbelievable, though.
They really love them, and I'm like, cool. That's really great. You go to TGS and like the biggest thing there is, you know, statue of Shadow the Hedgehog or something. And you go to Gamescom and it's giant tractor. It's not even a giant tractor. It's just a tractor. They just brought a tractor in.
I love that.
Angela Merkel went to one at one point. I think I was there for that.
Really?
Yeah, she was. I think there's a picture of her somewhere playing a farming simulator game, and I was
I was gonna say, did she beeline for The Sims? Yeah, no doubt, man. Yeah, that's amazing. And so it's interesting though. Yeah, that's amazing to hear. It's really intriguing to hear that, and this is why I think you're such an interesting person to speak to about this, because you've seen. I think you entered at such an interesting time, and you've been very aware of the fact that it was changing, and like it sounds like you've really noticed a lot of that stuff. And as I mentioned earlier on, it's a very different argument. Like now, talking about like what is games journalism, being a games journalist. It's not as if at our school careers days there was a person going around being like, "Have you ever considered games journalism?" But it felt like a more viable idea, as much as it was still a very difficult thing to get into. With the situation in games and games coverage as it is in terms of YouTubers, streamers, but also just, we're saying, big sites shrinking, and that like fear you were saying about that, or not fear, but the on-edgeness, that like uncertainty. If you had someone now that wanted to be a games journalist and had seen the series you made and said, that's what I want to do, what would you say to them? And like, would it be markedly different to what you would have said even maybe like pre-COVID, sort of 2019?
It would, but I wouldn't want to like disencourage. I wouldn't want to discourage anyone to do it. Like I very rarely even called myself a games journalist. Like there are very few times where I'm like, I did serious journalism here. Like when I'd make a documentary or something like that, it's like I feel more like a journalist. But because I was mostly making and editing videos, I was like, I'm a video producer. Sure. But it's sort of hard to separate those two. Like without a doubt, I was part of games journalism. But I always see it as like the written side and the video side. And I think part of that is because getting into the industry, in a lot of sites, there was that sort of element of those two things being their own silos, and trying to get them connect was often quite difficult. But and I never studied journalism. I studied computer programming. I sort of lucked into my job because I wanted to be a YouTuber, or thought, hey, this would be a fun thing to do in the evening. It was actually egotistical. I was like, I have such a funny time with my friends, and it's always a laugh, and we're always laughing, and I'm really funny when I'm playing with my friends. I'm going to put this on the internet, and then everyone will laugh with us. And then as soon as I start recording, it's like, I've forgotten how to be funny. And then no one is laughing. But I think it is a different prospect now. Even down to just the number of spots available. Totally. In press, it's fewer. Magazines have closed. Sites have closed. Sites have got smaller. It's harder for those individuals to. It's harder to get a spot in all those places now, which it sucks because you'd have to be really, really dedicated to like a certain site or a certain type of content or writing or reviews to really make a go of it. But I don't know if I know anyone, if I'm honest, that became a games journalist who wanted to be a games journalist.
That's so interesting.
It's all people that were passionate about games and wanted to share a voice, wanted to tell people about it, wanted to create something, and then that led into something bigger. Like, I had no aspirations in joining Gamespot when I started making YouTube videos. None at all. It was just like, hey, this is an actual option to me now. I met the right person. I've, gone through an interview. They like my stuff. This could actually be really cool. Like, yeah, of course I'm going to do it. It's one of the biggest games websites in the world. I'd be silly not to. But I think that's the thing I tell everyone now who wants to talk about games for a living, make videos about games for a living. The easiest thing to do, which is also not the easiest thing to do, simply because of time investment, is to do it for yourself.
Totally.
And the thing that sucks is that you might not make a living off of it. But if the right person watches your video, if the right person reads your article, if you have the right conversation on Twitter, X, sorry, I'm still not used to calling it.
We can still call it Twitter.
If you have the right conversation with the right person, and you are shown to be a nice, affable person who knows their way around an industry, doors will start to open for you. You don't need to be a huge YouTuber for PR to be open to like granting you access, to giving you a code, to letting you make your own video, make a couple of TikToks about your game. You don't need to be huge. You just need to be showing to be doing it and doing it consistently. And it's easy for me to say, having not uploaded a video in 2 months, but still. But if you're like, yeah, I'm going to use this code, I'm going to make a video about it, and I'm a cool person and a nice person, a lot of doors will open for you. Especially now when, we are in like a sort of edgy period in the games industry. Being a decent person will go a long way in just opening doors into getting that access. And there is, when I started, your options were making videos, not even like streaming wasn't huge at that point. But if you wanted to work in games press, you'd either be making videos for them, or you'd be writing articles, or you'd be some of the team that are like more behind the scenes. But in that case, in that instance, you're not really doing like the creation. And those teams were like vital for the running of sites and stuff. But like you said before, if you wanted to program or design websites, you don't have to go to a games website. But those used to be the two avenues that were open to you: making YouTube videos or writing articles. Now it is sustainable to work on YouTube Shorts, on TikTok. I mean, depending on, we're recording this on the 14th, so the TikTok might be banned in America in a few days. But there are more avenues to make that stuff, and again, like I think the best way to do it, and the best way to show your passion, is to make them yourself. And it's a bigger time investment, it's a bigger resource investment. But if you want someone to start paying for your videos or invite you in to make videos with them, if you can show them all cool videos that you've made, and you've got like an opinion that deserves to be heard, and you've been on social media engaging with press or creators that you respect and talking about subjects that you want to go on and talk about, that's the main thing to do. I can't even think of anyone that's been hired to work in games media that haven't had another creative outlet that they can point to. And even if it's not games, even if it's music or movies, but you love games, you can say, look how passionately I talk about movies, I've been wanting an outlet to talk about games. You can pivot into that. And that's the best thing to do, especially in the space that we're at now, where individuals are, individual and the personality driven content is very much where we're at. Make it for yourself. And if you're making it for yourself, you have the advantage of, hey, if you want to make a long form 40-minute video essay on the aesthetics of Helldivers 2 or the mini games of Yakuza, people will lap that sort of stuff up. People will love it. And if that's what you want to make it. You might not be afforded that opportunity in a website where you've got overheads, where you've got deadlines, where you've got, X number of videos a week to put out. But if you make all that stuff, you could succeed on your own, or you could catch the eye of other sites and be like, hey, yeah, come work with us. And there are even sites that are more strictly sort of YouTube platforms, or, YouTube is their primary sort of business venture. They've gotten big enough off of the backs of their own personality and conversations and stuff like that are now hiring people to come share their voice as well. Look at Second Wind. They were able to create something amazing from their time at The Escapist, but it was because people resonated with them, because they had passion, because they had series that people really enjoyed. But there's no reason why you can't do the same thing. And you can, again, if you're doing it for yourself, you can be as niche or as broad as you want. You can measure success how you want to measure it. Like, one of the people that I've been watching a lot on YouTube is a guy who's been following power lines around Grand Theft Auto to see where they end up.
Hell
and it's
yeah.
like, I would have had such a hard sell trying to get that video at GameSpot, or even making time to make that video at GameSpot. But if you want to make that, go for it. And again, I understand, like, it's not the best advice to be like, hey, if you want to do something, do it. But that's the best way to get into games journalism, content creation, any of that. And what's nice is if you start doing it and it works well, you might not need to go anywhere. You can just do it for yourself.
That's fantastic advice. I mean, like, but actually, like, a really nice, it's very positive advice, right? Like, as well, like, to hear that basically what people should be doing is be a good person, be passionate, and make something. And that's fantastic to hear.
I've always been very transparent that the way I landed into the games industry, a huge amount of that was luck. Like,
no doubt.
I was telling you, I made those business cards. I saw the right person. When I handed Lucy that business card, she took it to her boss. There were 2 people that had just handed in their notice, so the timing couldn't have been better. But you can also make your own luck.
Absolutely.
That was super luck driven, but put yourself in the best position possible. Make it so that if/when you get lucky, you're in the best position possible. You have a bank of content. You have some contacts. People know, at least, even through a grapevine, that you're a decent person, that you're engaged, that you're fun to talk to, that you're not gonna, what's the word I'm looking for?
Be an arsehole?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was trying to put it a little more poetically, but yeah, people know that you're not going to be an arsehole. And that's it. Like, again, some of it will be luck, because there are not many spots open. If you wanted to join IGN, if you wanted to join Kotaku, if you wanted to join GameSpot, it's harder to do that now. But yeah, that's the thing that really helped me. I was lucky, but when I got lucky, I had stuff to back it up with.
Totally. It's so true about capitalizing on luck. But totally.
A friend of mine gave me a piece of advice. I won't name his name because I don't know if he'll want me to. But he was Games Press, and then he moved into PR, where he moved into the PR side of games. And I asked him, when I was laid off, like, that was a potential career path for me. Maybe moving into PR, into communications. And I said, do you have any advice there? And all he said was, get a reputation of a thing doer. Doesn't even necessarily matter what thing. It could be that you're sharing your photographs. It could be that you're sharing your YouTube videos. It could be that you've got a SoundCloud that you're, showing off. It should be that you're just getting engaged in conversations. But be a thing doer. And then again, when it comes to like having that stroke of luck or having the right conversation, you can point to all those things. Or you'd be like, I'm known for these things. I've been involved in these things. Instead of just relying on like, yeah, I'm passionate, which is great. But you need to be able to back that up. There needs to be a tangible thing that shows your passion, especially now, because it's not enough to just say it. Because there's, if a role in games media opened up, there'll be thousands of people that will all be there saying, I love video games. But there might be only a few being like, I love video games. I love this video game. I love this video so much, I made a 20-minute documentary about the boot prints that are left in the mud as you're walking through a town, or something like that. Totally. Or I wrote this review. I did this article just because I wanted it to put it out there, because my passion took me there. That's what you need to show off more than anything.
That's sick. No, I love that. That guy's really positive. I expected that to be much more negative and be like, don't do it, run away. But that's great. I think people will be really jazzed by that. It's a very positive way to look at it. And you're talking about like doing things, and obviously you yourself are a thing doer, and some of the things you have done are I've stretched this a bit, the video series but Loadout and obviously Expert Reacts, which are, I mean, among other things, but these are two kind of absolute standouts of, like, to me, like, honestly, I would call them iconic games journalism. And again,
you'll make fun of me for the use the word iconic now. I said it so much in the videos.
Yeah, I guess so. But I think it's amazing. It's funny because you're saying about just seeing yourself as a video producer and kind of like almost that siloing of the review focused written or the businessy aspects that get considered as like that, you know, classical journalism, what have you. But the stuff you're doing in that kind of investigation is as journalistic and as fascinating as any kind of larger, more all-encompassing piece about games that gets created. And so I'd love to hear about, like, so did you come up with those ideas yourself? Was that something you always wanted to make? Did you always like guns?
Yeah, that was one of the weird things that I was always sort of nerdy about. Like, I always played first-person shooters, always liked history, always liked the intersection between history and reality. Like, it sounds very weird, but I have memories of being in school and at lunchtime in the library reading about machine guns, reading about World War II, reading about ancient Rome. And some of that's a bit more palatable than others. As soon as as soon as the librarian started to notice that I'm spending a lot of time on the Wikipedia page for the MP5, she was like, "Do I need to talk to parents? Is this something that I should be concerned about?" But I appreciate your kind words about Loadout, because Loadout and Expert Reacts are some of the things that I'm most proud of during my time in games. Loadout came from an idea that so years ago, one of our objectives at Gamespot was to create premium shows, and that's another thing in the YouTube space that you have to bear in mind, is that individuals are making videos that feel so premium, feel like they've got a big budget. And we a few of us were tasked in creating original programming, creating shows, creating a series of things that would go out weekly, and could, you know, grab an audience and have them coming back for more and more, even if it was, you know, 8 episodes in the first season. And my pitch was Loadout. It originally wasn't called Loadout, but yeah, I brought Loadout to the table. I think I actually, at one point I was pitching it as like an individual feature, and then I was like, this could actually become a show, and then it became a show, you know, dozens of episodes long across like 4 seasons, I think. But even if you look before that, the sort of content I was making, a lot of it was talking about the real history of X and how it's represented in this game. Like we talked about Romance of the Three Kingdoms. I remember making a video about, you know, the larger than life superheroes and the Romance of the Three Kingdoms that it was based on. You know, I've watched videos from Frankie on PC, a YouTuber that's come and gone. I remember he did videos where he talked about like massive battles in history and just used like Medal of Honor as the background to just tell me an interesting thing, and I really liked that. So yeah, I was always into action movies, shooters, you know, those types of games, that type of media. And I was always interested in how things are represented in pop culture. So I was like, hey, let's, you know, take a few things in games and sort of dispel some myths. Let's talk about things. Let's talk about these subjects in a way that can like educate people and break down some of these myths. A huge inspiration was Ahoy's videos. I don't know if you're familiar with Ahoy.
Yeah, of course.
He does great stuff, and he did a lot of stuff about, you know, he'll take an individual weapon and talk about it through the lens of video games. I wanted to do something like that, but take it in a bit of a direction. So we talked more about the history, the real world stuff, and you know, I'll be honest. When the series launched, there was comments. People were leaving comments saying this is just Ahoy's videos, and while I didn't agree, because I did think I was doing something a little different. There was an overlap, but I was doing something a little different, and they had their own merits. I still took it as a compliment that I was even being compared to those videos. Like, I loved those videos growing up. They were great. And as the series went on, I got to do more and more investigative stuff and cover more subjects. But yeah, it was just that intersection between loving history, loving games, wanting to connect those two things. And I'm always a sucker for a fun fact, and it was really just each video was a series of fun facts about a specific subject, but told within games. And the production of that, like, I'm super proud of. I worked on that with my colleagues Chris and Adam. Like, the only reason they even look as half as polished as they do is because they were behind the camera and they were doing like motion graphics and the edit. Like, I was responsible for like writing them, researching them, scripting, gameplay capture, and doing like interviews and stuff. But they really they did an incredible job at visually adding to the story that I wanted to tell, and helping me tell that story through visual media as well. Because it's the thing, you don't just want to tell the story with voiceover and with script. You've got to show them the story at the same time, and I think that's one of the things that we did really well. But I loved Loadout. It was one of my favorite things to make. That's what started my relationship with the Royal Armouries. Like, we reached out to them to ask if they would feature as expert guests on the first season of Loadout, and that relationship continued, and we were able to get like more and more access with them. And it wasn't until COVID happened, I was in the middle of writing another series of Loadout, and we were like, we can't do it. We can't do it in the way that we want to do it anyway. Like, I think we did a few episodes, and I was like, this just isn't what I want it to be. And that's when we were like, well, we've got an audience now, because I think that was after like 3 series. We've got an audience that likes this kind of content. How do we keep serving them? Like, what else can we do to, for all the fans of first-person shooters that have started to enjoy us talking about guns and breaking down myths? How can we continue doing that? And other sites were doing expert-driven content. And we were like, maybe there's a way that we can do that. Maybe there's a way that we can make it our own, make it unique to us. And, we've already got someone that has an incredible knowledge, like an encyclopedic brain about history and firearms that we can get in touch with and start featuring on videos. That being Jonathan Ferguson, the keeper of firearms and artillery at the Royal Armouries Museum, which houses thousands of iconic weapons throughout history, to come on the videos. And we were like, oh my god, it's weird, because that became like such a successful series, but the first couple of episodes we were like, this ain't popping. And it wasn't until when we like the third one in, we were like, oh, okay, we found our feet now. We know what we're doing here. And it was just like the first year of Firearms Expert was crazy. But we had like such like a loyal fan base that followed that series, and it was something that I made like multiple times a week, multiple times a month. Wow. For years. And I expanded it out to talk to other experts in other fields, everyone from a behavioural cat expert at the Battersea Cats and Dogs Home to people at the Viking Museum, to had David Rawlings swing a 2-handed sword like that far from my face. Like I cursed an armour historian into becoming a Warhammer fan, and now his kids are into Warhammer. Like, it's really cool. It was great videos to work on. But yeah, I've been into that sort of thing like basically all my life. Watched Mythbusters, all that sort of thing. Yeah, no, that's sort of what I wanted to do, but use like games and history to do that sort of thing.
Yeah, I mean, I think you perfectly did it. I think the thing is that if you had sat down and said what do you, like, from an outside perspective, I'm sure a lot of people that watched it would say the same thing. If you could kind of combine, what factors would you combine to create this show? I think Mythbusters, a passion for games, passion for history, and also just like a nerdy eye when you're of the person who plays the game and notices it while you're playing it, just enough to go like, is that right? Or like, oh, that's an interesting design. I wasn't going to make you say his full title. But,
if I didn't, there would have been comments. Like,
yeah, exactly. I was thinking.
It's again, I've sort of cursed him by changing his name. Almost nobody calls him just Jonathan Ferguson anymore. Like,
totally.
Maybe his like close friends and family, but that's probably about it.
I hope that one day he gets like knighted or something, and
Sir
they
Jonathan
announce him
Ferguson.
as the full title.
I've been trying to find ways to get him into a game.
That would be amazing.
Like, if in a different world, when Fallout London was happening, I would have reached out to the devs and said, it'll be really cool. Like, if we can do something like that. I don't think it's far now. It can't be. Like, and people have made like homage games to that series and stuff before, and like that's always been really touching. Like, and the content has largely remained pretty consistent across the years as well. But yeah, it's really fun to make, and really it's just anchored on me talking to people that are way more interesting than I am. Like,
it's all good interviews. That's why we're here. Yeah.
I've referred to it as like I'm like the humble farmer. Just I'm getting the cut of beef and the potatoes and all that stuff, and then I give it to the chef Jonathan, like, help me make this into something even more delicious, tastier than the sum of the parts. And then I get to work with some of the best editors in the business to, because if you watch an episode of that live, it's like 90 minutes of him and I waffling, and then we have to like cut it down to the gold, and I'm not great at that because I think it's all really interesting, and then other people have to step in and be like, you think it's interesting because you're a massive bloody nerd, but we need to like tighten it down. And I'm like, oh, okay, like, fine, I guess, if we have to for the YouTube audience, for the algorithm. But like, if there was a director's cut of every episode that I'd ever made, like they'd always be like double in length.
I was going to say it'd be the most popular Patreon bonus I think anyone would ever have had, man. Absolutely. Yeah. No, I love it. I think that's it. I think one of the things that it's funny that you put yourself as the farmer there, because I think it almost you're doing yourself a disservice, and you're not. One of the most important elements I think of why those shows for me anyway worked so well is the fact that you were the passionate insight that the viewer wanted to be themselves to a different extent. Maybe you knew more. Maybe I'm sure there's some that were watching that are encyclopedic knowledge too, and still found that you were this way to kind of get into this interview and feel it for themselves. And I think that as the farmer, it's like the world's most passionate farmer. It needs to be that part. It needs to be that farmer making that vegetable. It couldn't have been anybody, certainly. And I think that you managed to actually, I love that you said that you love history as well. Not that obviously, of course you do, but you could love guns, you could love games and kind of just enjoy the combination of the two. But I always found it really remarkable was the things, because I love history too, but mine's a bit like, I like older history, I guess, and some of that you kind of don't realize the gaps you have. And I remember the MP5 one you did, and you were talking about the embassy siege in London when like the SAS became prevalent and the MP5 itself, and I'd never heard of this. I was like, this happened like not even that long before I was born, I guess. I've got to read about it, and it's fascinating, it's unbelievable. And also then the way that reflects on the gun itself and changes your perception and the personality that they have. And I think you also gave people that insight and that being able to kind of get into that there's more to this than it just being a tool, and that like a good car, there's reasons behind everything, and there's emotion that it gives out by the way it's designed. It's amazing.
I mean, they're all kind words. You'll make me very bashful, but it's funny because it's the kind of content I think a younger me might have like been unsure about, because I'm sort of tricking people into learning about stuff. Totally. And I've learned like so much throughout it. Like when it's come to this content, especially because we're talking about history, war, guns, all that stuff, I've tried really, really hard to be accurate about everything, to the point where even if I talk about it afterwards, I'm like, oh, I don't even know if I'm getting like that actual number right, that year right, and I'll want to go and like look up my notes. Like I make so many notes because I want to be accurate. And it's the kind of thing, like if I'm presenting factual information, I want to have done the research to make that as factual as possible, and to really know my onions, not to go back to the farmer metaphor again. But if somebody can go away and like be like, oh, that's interesting, like that's a cool element. And I think every episode for me has something like that, or there's always been, it'll be like, oh, okay, I've got this idea for an episode because there's this cool thing, and it's like branching down, like oh, there's a cool thing connected to that, there's a cool thing connected here towards a game, oh, they intersect really well here, that's really interesting. Like we did episodes around the M16 and the AK-47, and that's like the good guy gun and the bad guy gun in games, and like why is that the perception? When we did, I think one of the early episodes was about the suppressor, and we grew up in movies when it was like the pew pew like noise, and I didn't realize that it was invented like so many years before. We think of it as like a modern sort of spy thing, and it was it was an interesting. It always had interesting challenges associated with it, and like how to handle those subjects and how to do them justice as well. Like the one I did about weapon names in games, like that was like multiple years of research that went into that because I wanted it to be accurate. And you know, some of those were weeks of waiting for an email back or waiting for a contact to get back to me. But that probably more than any other one, like I'm really proud of it because it's like become what, well, when I released that episode, that was probably the most in-depth that subject had been explored.
Absolutely.
Up to that point, because I'd like, you know, had so much access to people now, and some of them create like hard stories to tell, but you know, they were all born from just like a passion of wanting to talk about this sort of thing. You know, it's cool that me being so nerdy about games and guns and movies so many years ago, it's like, oh, I can use that to talk about games, to present these like interesting, you know, pieces now. Yeah, very, very fortunate to have made all of those, and yeah, that'll be the work that I probably look most fondly on, the Loadout series and the Expert Reacts series. Like, and it's humbling to know that they've had an effect on people, on the games industry, even like to a very small degree. But like, I was told by the Royal Armouries at one point how important that content was as a donation driver during COVID when they were closed, and that made me very emotional. Like, that's a museum that I care a lot about and had been a real part of my professional career at that point.
Totally.
And it was just a museum that I thought was really cool. So the fact that even to a little bit they were like, this growth in perception of us, this visibility, drove donations that it was actually tangibly helpful during the pandemic.
Totally.
And now they've, you know, also grown up their own great YouTube presence. I was like, dang, I feel like such a small part of that, but I was like, that's like really, really humbling. Like, it's very, very cool, and I feel very fortunate to have been part of that, and that I got to make all that stuff with like a really incredible team. Like, Chris and Adam had to put up with a lot of me being very nerdy about stuff and me being very sort of anal about stuff. Like, when we were shooting B-roll for certain weapons for episodes of Loadout, I'm like, right, get that specific nut and bolt. And they're like, okay, if you say so. Always like very patient, and again, like always, you know, it was always incredible to see that end product, because yeah, I've again, just, if it was up to me, they'd all be double the length, and that might not have always been a good thing.
No, that's amazing. I think it is incredible. Like, I think what you did is incredible. And like with the Royal Armouries, it means, yeah, Royal Armouries is like my childhood museum. My family's all from Yorkshire, so it was all going down and going to the Royal Armouries was always the highlight. But no, I think like it is an impact, and then not just on that impact that you've had. You said the small impact that you had, or that it's had on games. I think that series like what you made is arguably the most impactful, real impact on games, because when you talk about art and you talk about film and all these things, it's not like this review and it got 5 stars and that's going to influence the next movie. It's often the things that are like investigating these interesting surrounding areas. I know, like, I don't know if you've ever seen Every Frame a Painting on YouTube, but incredible stuff. And I always, to me, the stuff you made is it's going that direction. I think that kind of impact can be huge. And like, do you feel, have you had devs talk to you about it? I've certainly spoke to devs about, have you watched this video about copyright? And they get terrified because all their lecturers have told them all these horror stories. And I've said, go watch this video and listen to a weapons expert say, you're all freaking out a lot. So do you feel that impact, or maybe you're too humble to say? I
mean, that is very humbling, and I do appreciate that. Like, I've got some anecdotes, and it's all anecdotal. Like the weapon names ones about copyright is one that has come back to me a few times and said, like, this got shared around the office and it became a conversation. And I wouldn't want to talk about like what dev that is.
Sure.
But there are some devs that have been super honest about the stuff that I've made and how it's had an effect. Hunt Showdown, the developers even put it in their blog post.
One of my favorite games.
When we did, I think, the first episode, Jonathan commented on a reload animation, and then they changed it, and I was like, that's really cool. Like, I wasn't even in the episode at that point. Me becoming more prominent in the episodes was a thing down the line, because a lot of people were saying like, oh, I wish they would tell him this, I wish I would tell him that, and I'm like, I am telling you, it's just we record for like 90 minutes an episode. Like, so not all of it goes everywhere, and I was like, okay, they need to see me telling them. And it was actually a Warhammer episode. I was like, they really need to see a Warhammer nerd giving Jonathan context now, because if he just magically knows what a melter gun is, or, you know, the context behind a bolt gun, it's not going to really make much sense. But no, like, that was maybe one of the first where I saw like the actual change to a piece of content that I helped create change a game. And since then, I've had the developers say like, these videos have become like, on the art team or like the weapons team, sort of required viewing, and we've put certain weapons in because we didn't know about them, and then we learned about them because of this, or, you know, even just showing them off allowed us to like, oh, that's interesting, that's an interesting story behind it, or, oh, we can see it a bit better now, let's build off of this. I know the Royal Armouries have had more in the way of developers reach out to them for consultancy, which is really cool. But like, when I got made redundant, a bunch of developers that I'd never really spoken to, just like Twitter mutuals, DM me and like, really sorry to hear that every episode was shared around like the art team, shared around this, like, influenced a lot of people on my team to do that sort of thing. And another thing that like I hadn't really thought about, to someone from a game studio told me, until, because of the success of the series, because of how sort of prominent the Expert Reacts stuff became, they saw the weapons when they had cool details on them, when they had like interesting reloads, when they had an attention to detail, and they said, we now put more care and attention into creating detailed stuff, to having those details on show for players to sort of to latch onto, to make them interesting objects, to not make just a firearm that you shoot, you know, the enemy with in a multiplayer match, to make it interesting of itself. And the fact that a developer came to me and said that you know, we now consider that element much more than we used to, because those videos helped elevate that sort of subject more and more. That again, I was just like, what? I'm just a nerdy guy making like videos about like games and guns and stuff, man. Like, that's for real? Like, I sort of still can't believe it, but like, yeah, the number of people that have, you know, anecdotally told me that, yeah, every, like, when we're doing weapon design stuff in the studio, they all get shared around. Like, every video every week gets put on the Slack. Like, I know that, you know, if we've done videos around certain franchises before, and someone representing that franchise has just reached out and said, this was shared around the company Slack on Monday, came up in a meeting, we all talked about it, we all watched a bunch of it, it was really great. Like, and now just the fact that some studios out there are paying more attention to that sort of stuff, and the audience enjoys that stuff a bit more, like, again, is so mind-numbingly bizarre to think about, and like super humbling. But to me, it just makes me feel like, hey, if someone else was making it, I would have been that nerd. Like, I would be the guy being like, oh, hey, it's really cool that they added this specific animation in for the AK-47 in this specific game. Like, that's really, really neat. And I think that's probably the general reaction to a lot of people that watch my work and then go and play a game, that and in any way being able to see a parallel between those, being like, huh, neat, that's neat.
Totally.
Like, yeah, it's crazy to think about, but yeah, really, that was like a nice silver lining when I got laid off. A lot of people being like, oh, the studio will miss that, like, for basically a free consultancy as well. I was like, yeah, I bet you bloody loved it.
No doubt. That's amazing though, man. No doubt. Yeah, I mean, I think when that news dropped, it's one of the few times where you've got like people from all sides of the industry are like crying out. It's that Star Wars, all these voices just suddenly being silenced. But the amount of fans just shocked, and then devs, I'm not surprised, man. And I remember that with the Hunt show. I always like, because I love Hunt, and I love their weird weapons, and I had always assumed that most of those weapons were completely made up, and then I couldn't believe the amount of them that were real or based on some real bizarre ones, like that shotgun reloader for the Romero and things like this. But
the one that always jumps out to me is Rust.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
And the first Rust episode we did, I think, is the most popular episode of Firearms Expert Reacts we ever did. I think it was on like 6 million views. And Jonathan's holding up a gun called the Ioka on the thumbnail. And I didn't know that was a real gun. I thought it was because in Rust there's these really primitive weapons, and it's like you shove handmade shells and you hit it with a flint and it goes bang, like really, really primitive. And I was like, that's really weird. I was like, I'm sure there's probably something like that in history. And I went and did a load of research, and then I was like, oh, there is one. That is that. That's at the Royal Armoury. It's like, what the hell? So it was like a real like, oh my god, this is gonna bang. Like seeing this and being able to like put all that together. And not only was it like cool to see, it also was like, dang, like the Rust devs did their research as well. Like fair play to them. Like they made something, they realized something that was like so niche. Only one exists, and it's something that was someone made in their garage, but they gave it like such a weird second life in the virtual space. And it's like it's those things, and I think it's resonated with so many devs, because if I was a developer and that developer was making it, we'd still be feeling the same way. Those devs are as nerdy about this subject as I am. That's why they're like hard surface artists or weapon modelers. That's why they're in that industry. That's why they're in that sector, because they're probably just as nerdy as me about this subject. They've just got they're tapping into that passion in a different way. So I've always had like really great conversations with people in that area of development.
No doubt, man. I imagine that also they're like finally validated in a lot of cases. There's a lot of like, or just even the detail that they have put in, the way that you would highlight not just like, hey, this is a good model, but like the individual aspects of how well modeled it is. I'm sure that there was so many sitting there at home being like, oh my god, someone noticed that I added the clip on the right side. Like, yes, it's it means a lot, I think, as well, right? To devs, we're saying about AAA and the passion and all these things, and
yeah,
that's where it comes back.
We've talked about Helldivers a lot. Helldivers 2 was a game that I was like, you've put a surprising amount of detail in these weapons, and a lot of it was probably never going to be seen by people, or it's not, because it's not in your face enough, or it's not in your face to the point where it's really obvious to the player. But all of these moving parts and all these details and greeblies and movable parts, you're not always supposed to notice them, but when you notice the whole package, it enhances it all the more, because it's like your subconscious is tapping into all these little things to make it feel like, even if someone says, I don't know why it feels realistic, I can't point to the moving parts or specific elements that is making it realistic, but I know it feels realistic.
Yeah, that's awesome. But no, it's no doubt, it's so cool. Like I'm glad that you've heard that. Like I'm glad that devs have reached out to you and said it. Do you know what I mean? Because some of these things, especially with devs, right, quite often everyone's just sitting happily on their own, thinking no one else wants to hear from them. But it's great that they've actually told you, no, it meant something, and it really did impact. Because I'm not surprised, and I think that kind of content has the capability of doing that much more. Because it's almost, to me, it feels like an impasse between genuine entertainment and like academic, and like a real belief in the research, but also making a point of it and discussing it, and not just going, look how cool it is, but why is it cool? So it's awesome. I think we need more like what you made in games. Well,
I appreciate that. I'm sure, who knows, right?
Yeah, well, exactly.
Years still early, but yeah, that's stuff that I loved making, and I'd love to just sort of do stuff like that again. It's just finding the right avenue for it, because I've still got a very nerdy brain and I still love that stuff. So fingers crossed it won't be the last that I get really nerdy about something. And another thing, like, I'm glad I got to, at the very least, say goodbye in even if it was in a pinned comment. Like, I was really gutted that the last episode to go out was an episode that I wasn't available to be in. And I tried really hard to be in like 99% of the episodes. I think I was away in Prague. I think that was when I was doing the Kingdom Come Deliverance 2 event. So I was like, right, I can't be in that episode, but you know, it is what it is. If I knew it would be the last, I would have moved heaven and earth to make sure I was in that one. But even just being able to say, you know, hey, I appreciate everyone watching this, and the response even that got, again, like, very humbling. And this is, it's even from start to finish and all throughout, it has been a very humbling experience, both from how I've seen the show grow, from the combination of work that went into Loadout and the Expert React series, to what it meant to a lot of people, and just like the reception of when it come to end, and then finding out how much it meant to how many, you know, to how much influence it had in games. Like, that's really, really cool to see. And if I can do something half as important or as rewarding in the rest of my career, I think I'll be doing okay.
No doubt. Yeah, there's a few reactions like it. I saw people running to Reddit when your comment went up in seconds.
My job, like, status being like a post on r/games is like not a thing that I thought would happen. Like, I think the first Reddit post about it was maybe in like the Two Best Friends subreddit, and there was one in the Valkyria Chronicles subreddit, because someone had been asking for that episode for so long, and I was like, if he does it for a year, I'll make it. And I felt bad for him. Like,
no doubt.
I mean, I feel bad for myself at the same time.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, they can stick it.
But very odd that it became sort of very niche Reddit news as well. Like, bizarre to me.
But totally. It shows how much people love it, man. Definitely. It's like, I'm not surprised people love it. I think it's like passion begets passion, right?
Yeah.
So it's amazing. But I mean, and so what can we expect to see from you at the moment? I mean, I know that you're doing a bit of streaming. It's not new to you. I think you did a bit before, right? But is it kind of up?
So I've got a few bits and bobs that I can't talk too much about. A project in the works. He's cooking, as the kids say. But I've thought, you know, I started out making content myself. My YouTube channel was like some previews, let's plays, that sort of thing. And I don't think I'm ever going to be in a better position to return to that channel. All the old rubbish content is gone. But if I was ever going to make a go at being a solo content creator, now's the time. Like, I've got so much experience. I've got contacts. I've got equipment. Like, there's never going to be a better time. You know, when I started doing it myself, it got me a job at Gamespot. Now that job is gone, who knows what I could do. So it's going to be an interesting year. I'm going to sort of return to being a solo content creator on my own platforms, on my YouTube and my Twitch, and basically return to doing like previews and opinion pieces and sharing stories that I think are interesting. And they might be frequent, they might be infrequent, but again, it's like, I don't have a real deadline to content anymore, so I should explore what I actually think is cool to make, you know, beyond the Expert series or Loadout. What else did I want to make? So making a go of it, going solo on YouTube, that's going to be half of my time. Well, YouTube and Twitch, so I'll be doing plenty of my own videos, hopefully, once I finally kick myself up the bum to do it. And my own streams. Like, streaming is something that I really enjoyed over the pandemic, and I think it meant a lot to people watching streaming during the pandemic. It really helped connect people, and I thought, again, if I'm ever going to give it another shot, it has to be now. Like, I'd be silly not to at least try while I'm, you know, exploring other things. So half my time is going to be split between my own YouTube and my own Twitch, and the other half is going to be in this secret project.
Very cool. That sounds amazing. I can't wait for it.
I mean, well, I say half. It's going to be where I can get it. But this thing that I'm working on, I think, you know, it could be really good. And again, it's one of those things that if I'm ever going to make this, it has to be now.
I really hope it is a mod for hot dogs, horseshoes, and hand grenades, where I can have you and Jonathan on either side describing the guns and telling me how I keep.
I mean, I can message Anton and be like, "Hey, we've just had this idea. Let's put it in your game."
Oh, amazing! But no, that sounds amazing, man. Definitely, and I love that. I know it was the first video, and I guess it was the first before a break that you uploaded. But I loved the we have Jonathan Ferguson at home when you were talking through the story.
Yeah, and that was just because I was
awesome.
streaming. Like my plan was to just hit the ground running and start making stuff again. And I made those videos, and maybe I should have delayed it a little bit, but I made those videos and realized how bloody burnt out I was. So I was like, if I want to put my best foot forward, I'm going to take a break. And again, if I'm going to take a break, I should do it now. Gamespot was, I don't mind saying this, busy. Like the output that we did was intense, and I mean, a lot of people in the industry are burnt out. And I was like, I've just lost my job. I'm going to make a start on this new venture, but I'm going to have a beer and a rest first.
Too right, man. Too right. Yeah, my year was called the retirement year when I got made redundant, and it was just like, live it, man. But totally, it's an industry of burnout, and no, as you should, treat yourself right.
Yeah, and I think if I'm asking people to invest their time into continuing to follow me, it should be like the best I can do it, not tired old Dave nattering.
Totally.
Put whatever he can together. So fingers crossed. It's been a long time since I've made my own video without the support of a team and stuff like that. So might be rubbish, but only one way to find out.
No doubt. Well, I think it's going to be amazing, man.
I appreciate that. Thank you. Yeah, fingers crossed.
And it's a regular Dave, right? Twitch.
Yeah, a regular Dave. You find me everywhere. I cornered that username 10 years ago, so I might as well start using it.
It's a good one,
again.
man. It's
got it off a milkshake.
Good. Really?
Yeah.
What's that mean? There was a milkshake called a regular Dave?
There was a milkshake called the Dave. I think it was a franchise called Shakeways.
Wow, I've never heard
that.
That
might have closed, but it was a milkshake called the Dave, and it was vanilla blended with. It was one of those milkshake shops that was like a sweet shop. And you're just like, what sweets do you want?
Oh, sure.
It was milkshake with Kinder Bueno and Maltesers mixed in, and it's very sweet. So all I could handle was a regular sized one. So I'd go and ask for a regular Dave, and I was like, wait a minute.
You're standing at the till like, hold on a fucking second, and they're just like, sir,
light bulb.
It's a queue behind you. Hold on.
I could have got a large Dave, but that's what the milkshake would have created if I did go on that big.
Large Dave as well doesn't work as well as a username. I don't know.
No, that's someone that plays darts and smells like pork scratchings.
Yeah, absolutely. Amazing. Well, I guess just before we jump off, we can see a little bit in the background, obviously, just as a personal thing. I love Warhammer 40k, and I can see that you do as well. Yeah. Who do you collect? And do you play, or do you just paint?
I collect Dark Angels as my main army. I collect everything that I sort of think looks cool. So that Death Core of Krieg box was just released, and I was like, of all the times for me to have to watch my pennies. But no, I love the franchise, really. Like, I've been a Warhammer fan since I was about 14, even younger than that, actually, probably like 12. Whenever Fire Warrior came out, that was like my introduction to Warhammer. And then I just liked the knightly vibe of Dark Angels. My girlfriend got me this art for Christmas, and I have this Warhammer gallery and all my miniatures here. I don't play as much as I'd like to. I do a lot of painting. I used to run a Warhammer club way back when in Loading Bar in London, the gaming bars. That was really good. But what got me back into it is when I started a GameSpot, is because I was like, that's one thing that I think people in this space have to sort of keep in mind, is if you love games and you want a career in games, you're turning your hobby into work. You need to be conscious of that. Even if you can separate it, and I still enjoy games in the evening and all that stuff, there still needs to be a separation. And I was like, well, I want a hobby that doesn't feel like work. Because if I'm playing games at work and talking about them, making videos about them, it's not always appealing to go home and play more games. So I was like, okay, well, I used to collect Warhammer. I've probably got some models somewhere. And then I fell back into it. I've got like 20 Dark Angels on my desk just in front of me, waiting for me to finish them. Love everything about it: the lore, the painting, the the sense of calm sitting down with the brush gives me.
No doubt.
The games, like especially, for everything from Total War to Space Marine to everything in between. Really, I've played like basically every Warhammer game. I became It's not a title that is not contested anymore, but at one point I was referred to as the UK games industry Warhammer guy.
Oh wow!
I know that there are plenty of other people that are also massively into Warhammer now, especially. But again, like funnily enough, when I went for my interview at Gamespot, the magazine that was in the waiting room was a copy of PC Gamer with the Total War Warhammer 1 cover. With Carl Franz on his demigriff. Oh, Lord knows will check me there.
Yeah.
And I think in the interview I was like, I really love Warhammer. Like, I'm really excited about that game, because they were asking me what games am I most excited about. So I was like, oh, sweet. So from day one of GameSpot, I was talking about Warhammer. And now, like, I'll give you a peek into the cupboard of potential. Like, it's just
the cupboard of potential.
Back to back, like all models in there, because every good Warhammer person has a pile of shame, or a pile of potential, as they like to frame it. But no, I love it. That's if I'm not playing games or talking about games, I'm probably inaccessible because my phone's on silent and I've put a bad action movie on in the background and I'm painting tiny war dollies.
Amazing. That sounds like heaven, man. No, it's fantastic. I have a similar background with 40k, and it's definitely one of those of like, there is something about sitting and painting little death machines that is unbelievable. I was Space Wolves, so they're like,
oh, so we're like rivals, really.
Yeah, this is it, man. Unfortunately, anytime, and it's no one's ever Space Wolves. It's always the Angels people bring up, and I'm like, oh god. I'm like, now I have to say
they're making a comeback.
Well, this is it. But then I didn't realize until only a few years ago that they're kind of the bad guys of Space Marines, that they're the ones that are sent out to kill other Space Marines.
Oh, yeah.
And all this mad stuff.
The Emperor's Executioners.
Yeah.
So getting very nerdy now.
Yeah.
That's what opened the door to doing... I did a Warhammer-based episode of Loadout about the bolt gun.
Yeah, totally.
Then they told me the only reason that they opened that door to me, the access that wasn't even afforded to people at the BBC at that time, was because I was like obviously a big old nerd, and they were like,
that's sick,
this is someone that loves Warhammer, like sounds like an interesting idea. And that was like the giddiest I'd been on like a location shoot. Like we had deadlines to like shoot all the B-roll and shoot my bits to camera inside Warhammer World, and I was like, yeah, but look at this, look at that, oh my god, that's really cool. I have what's called the old man stance, which my girlfriend makes fun of me for. It's this.
Yeah, hell yeah, man.
When you're looking at stuff with your hands clasped behind your back, and it was just me doing that, and they were like, Dave, it's time, you need to do your lines now. And I'm like, okay.
No.
So can we go back around the museum? We're like, no, we've got to get home. I was like, damn it, okay.
It's the true posture of contentedness, absolutely. Yeah. And only old men and Warhammer fans can achieve it. Absolutely, man.
It's a good time.
Yeah, it's awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining us today, Dave.
My pleasure, mate. Good chatting to you.
Fascinating. Genuinely, all the best for everything in the future, mate. We'll be very closely following it. You've made I would say some of the best and most important video game series of the last 10 years. So
that's very high praise. Not sure I deserve that, but I appreciate it nonetheless.
I'm sure you would say that. But yeah. Until the next video that you put out, cheers.
Thank you. See you soon.
And that was our interview with Dave Jewitt. A huge thanks to Dave for joining us. As you could tell, I had a ton of fun speaking to him and found his insights absolutely fascinating, and I hope you did as well. Of course, you can follow Dave directly at @irregulardave on YouTube and Twitch. But even though we recorded the interview earlier this year, I am now happy to say that you can also check out Dave's new content following @WatchEXP on YouTube and Patreon. Of course, you've probably already heard the news, but we're going to be getting more expert reacts. I cannot wait to watch more of the series, and I'm so excited that we get more of it. We're very blessed. It's a great start to 2025. Thank you so much for checking out the interview, and I hope you enjoyed listening to us. If you would like to hear more, check out some of our previous interviews on the channel and our Indie Games podcast, Indie Views, where I speak to incredible indie developers about their upcoming and early access games. Until the next time, thanks from us.